Any concerns for the city in terms of the downgrade of the province's credit rating?
No, not at this time. The challenge when the province's credit rating gets downgraded is if that impacts the province's cost of borrowing, that can impact the city's cost of borrowing because we borrow through the province. However, we have access to other credit facilities, so since our credit rating is very, very good, if that means we have to find different ways to borrow through the province, it's something we can look at.
Let's talk about art.
No, let's
I'm sorry.
not.
It's not even my question, it's for a colleague of mine.
All right,
he has other art installations around the city. Are we looking at potentially taking those down?
No.
On secondary
Sir.
secondary suites,
Yes.
Keating says maybe it's time to stop the freebies and the fees associated with
Well, council had that very debate not even a year ago in one of our endless debates. And we determined that actually that cost for bringing affordable market rental online in the city on a per unit cost is actually unbelievably cheap. And the majority of council said actually that's an investment well worth making.
But it seems his point this morning in his line of questioning was the city is foregoing a lot of revenue.
I think Councillor Keating is looking for a way to come to the light on secondary suites.
Do you think we're going to see a notice of motion in the next month or two concerning secondary?
I am absolutely certain that you will see a notice of motion in the next few weeks concerning secondary suites.
Can you tell us?
There will be a notice of motion concerning secondary suites coming forward in the next few weeks.
How many players?
Well, this is really, I don't mind telling you this. This is a little bit of sausage making, but I can let you in on it, which is I think that every member of council is interested in reform and in fixing the situation. The question is, as it has always been, how? And what sort of sweeteners need to be in there in order to bring the majority of council on side. I personally am in favor of what I call a skinny solution, which is just make them discretionary everywhere, period. And so we'll see if council has any appetite for that.
Your level of optimism versus the many other motions that have come through that room behind you?
Super duper magically optimistic.
What makes this time different?
New players around the table, and everyone has realized that we spent 20% of our time in 2016 on this issue, and I think cooler heads have prevailed and people are really looking for a solution.
Sorry, I'm going to get in trouble with coming back for a one-word answer. Why not?
Well, because there haven't been any issues raised with any other ones. You know, when I was going to use an analogy of the trust on this building that is really terrific. So.
On green bins, do you think it's really that hard for Calgarians to adjust to a bi-weekly green bin pickup? Is it not worth the money that the city can save?
That's it. That's the question. The question is the answer is in the question, which is let's go through a season of this, and in fact, let's go through a season of this when people are actually paying. Of course, because people are not paying yet, and see how we can make the system work better. And I think we're very, very open to that.
Did you want to give us your compost review? You checked it out.
It smelled really good.
What were the notes?
It smelled like fresh earth and loam. It smelled like Calgary in the spring. It was kind of cool, actually. The new e-scribe system, when fully implemented, will allow for electronic voting if council so desires.
All right. At a cost of?
Not much. Because I think it's already inherent in the system. I think.
Not getting the
Why are we here?
Let's talk about the police.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So council decided to support the $20 million. Can you tell us why?
Sure. I think that many members of council heard two different things. One is that it is important for the police to be able to find efficiencies in the work they do the way that other business units here in the city have done, perhaps and particularly through the zero-based review process. However, we also understand that we cannot continue a hiring freeze on police as the city continues to grow and as the officer workloads become stretched. So we need to not only replace existing police officers, we also need to hire new ones. And fundamentally, council agreed overwhelmingly to do that.
The commission says it's been finding efficiencies and it's been making cuts the past 2 years. I mean, do you think so?
Now, let me be clear on this. They have been, and in fact, very uniquely among police services across North America, they've really come to the table to be part of the solution, as, by the way, has the fire department here. And in many, many other jurisdictions, police and fire departments just don't. because they know that councils will eventually give them what they want. And this particular commission and this service have been very, very good about coming to the table. I continue to believe, however, that they would benefit from going through the zero-based review.
Councillor Chahal was saying it's kind of a tough pill to swallow, that council can't weigh in on how that money is spent. Of course, they just can't. What are your thoughts on that?
That's actually a really important thing. We have civilian control of the police for a reason. Democracies need civilian control of the police. Politicians cannot control the police. I get phone calls in my office, I would say, every month saying, why haven't you arrested so-and-so for doing this? And you don't want to live in a world where the politicians can tell the police who to arrest. You don't want to live in a world where the politicians can tell the police where they should have beat cops, or what neighborhoods they should focus on and which ones they shouldn't focus on. That's why we've got a volunteer police commission. That's why they do their work. And I know it's frustrating for politicians sometimes, especially new politicians, to understand that that is really a fundamental tool of our democracy, but it is.
So to be clear, the second part of that motion where it talks about the body-worn cameras, the additional officers, that's because CPS put that forward.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Well, it sounds like the transit cuts are being reversed. Can you explain the importance of that from council's perspective?
Well, they're not exactly being reversed, just to muddy the waters a little bit. So transit agreed to put some money, council agreed to put some money back into transit in order to optimize the system. That means that some of the more egregious cuts will be reversed and that there's a little bit of money to invest in additional service on different routes.
But there still will be some changes at transit, right?
Yes. So we cannot guarantee that all of those cuts won't happen. Some of them, frankly, were no-brainers. But some of them, there were some challenges. So we'll reverse the bad ones and invest in some other things as well.
And just to be clear, this is done in a way that's not going to have an impact on the tax rate because some money is being taken from the rainy day fund?
That's correct. So council did something that was a bit confusing, but for the low-income transit pass, because there's still a debate to be had on what portion of that the province should fund, they chose to fund that using rainy day fund money rather than operating money. It was already in the operating budget. The increase was already in the operating budget, so council then took the room that they created in the operating budget and used it to fund transit hours.
And that's going to create a danger next year if you don't get the funding from the province, doesn't it?
Correct. It creates what we call a bow wave, which means that next year we'll have to find that money. So if we don't come up with a new funding agreement with the province and we want to continue the program, we'll have to find the money. But I'm committed to finding that money. I think the program is very important and we have to find a way to let it continue.
What's your level of confidence that the province can put something towards this?
50-50. Certainly the province has indicated that this is a priority. This is, frankly, a provincial government responsibility. But given their fiscal constraints, it's difficult. On the other hand, 2 or 3 or 4 million a year in their budget is a much, much smaller drop than it is in our budget.
And for people who maybe aren't watching this minute by minute, where's their property tax increase at?
Who are those people? Why aren't they watching it minute by minute by minute? This year's property tax remains south of 1%. Property tax increase remains south of 1%.
So what the police, the approval of the police increased it by 0.8?
0.8, and then a little bit for nonprofit organizations in the community took it to about 0.9. And I hate using these tax numbers. I much prefer using the impact that is to an everyday house, and I can't remember what that is.
Do you want to go over why you thought the amendment from Councillor Woolley regarding communications in transit was such a terrible idea?
Did I say terrible? Yes, I meant terrible. Because we ought not to randomly be choosing departments that we maybe don't like or are frustrated with and say, take away their money and put them towards departments we like. I think that's irresponsible budgeting. I know that wasn't Councillor Woolley's intent, but I think that's very dangerous. And the funny thing about it is, in every single discussion with the general managers, every single one, council members criticized the communications level and said we have to communicate more. And so then to randomly say, let's do that by cutting communications, I didn't see the logic there.
Can you talk about where Councillor Collier-Pert's motion landed with those groups? Or
So there was a very messy conversation around, and by the way, this is why I always appreciate it when council members send me their amendments in advance so we can manage the discussion. Anyway, there was a very messy conversation around our investment in community services and particularly youth programs and crime prevention programs. It was very messy because it was framed as reversing cuts in the existing budget, but the cuts were not to those programs. So in the end, Council has not yet reversed any of those cuts, but they will have a conversation about whether they want a strategy around community safety, youth, and crime prevention, and if they want to put any money towards that. And I imagine that is probably where we will start our conversation tomorrow.
Can I ask you, related to transit, just so it's clear in the public's mind, like yesterday you came up, there was this list of the specific routes and the changes on each route. Those are all not necessarily going to be restored. Can you explain why?
Yeah, so every season, those who take transit know very well that every season we have seasonal service changes. And so what would have happened was that your seasonal service changes in 2018, had we not made this change, would have included a series of cuts. Now what's going to happen is transit's got some money to play with, so there'll still be seasonal service changes. They may well include some cuts, but they have a little more money, so they won't have to cut that deeply, and they will be, in some cases, be able to invest in more hours.
And it could be some of those routes that were on that document
Correct.
yesterday, but not all.
But it could be some, it likely won't be all, but they will have the opportunity to look through where the highest need is.